Recently, I posted a video on making a version of Azerbaijani plov. This is another plov, or rice pilaf as it is called in the West, that's from another nation in Central Asia, and formerly part of the Soviet Union. This is dense, rich, and aromatic, as well as being an original flavor. It's delicious. Because of the way it's cooked and the spices that are used, it's nothing like you've ever tasted. I decided to make this video because A, I received requests for it, and B, because after looking at other online recipes, I saw serious mistakes everywhere. Here's an absolutely authentic version. I'm making the seasoning for the lamb. I've got about 1.5 teaspoons, a little bit more of cumin, about 1.5 teaspoons coriander seed, good healthy, maybe 1.25, 1.5 teaspoons of salt, and one of these red chilies I dried myself. It's a ripe serrano chili. You can use some chili powder if you don't have this. I'm not putting the stem in. And then just grind this up. Now, that's done. We're going to take about a teaspoon of this mixture, good healthy teaspoon of this mixture, set it into a little dish, a little bit more. And we're just going to set this aside. We're going to use this later. The rest of this is going to go on the lamb in just a minute as soon as we cut it up. The first step to this, I've got 1.25, 1.25 kilograms of lamb. The first step here is that you're going to have to get some of this fat cap off. You don't have to do it meticulously and get every last bit off, but you have to do it pretty well, because we need the fat for browning, for cooking it, and then also when we're done here, we don't want to end up with lamb that's got tons of fat on it. So, like I said, you don't have to be meticulous, but you want to get most of this off. And you want to end up with this. We've got pieces of fat here. Now I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this down into some smaller pieces, so this will help render it more quickly, just for the sake of time. You don't really have to do this, I suppose. It'll render eventually, but you don't want it to take 2 hours to render, because you got other things to do with your oven. If you're like me, you don't want to have the lamb take up the oven the entire day. Okay, so we cut it up. Now it's going to go into, this is the same pot we're going to use later on for braising the lamb, but right now I'm just putting the fat in here by itself, and it's going to go in a much hotter oven in order to get this to melt, and with the lid on it as usual. Now, as for the rest of this, you need to get this bone out of here, and then we need to cut this up into very large pieces. So we've got a little bit more butchery to do here. This is what you should have. You should have 4 large pieces of lamb. They're roughly equal. And we're going to put those in, and all the spices are going to go on here, except for those ones that we pulled off to the side in a little cup, like I showed you. And then the bone is also going to go in here. I'm not as interested in the bone picking up the spices, so I put that in last. Bone can pick up a little bit of spice, but we're not going to eat the bone. Mostly we want the spice on the meat, of course, because that's what we're going to eat. But this will reinforce the lamb flavor, and it'll also provide a canvas for holding a little bit more of the spices, so it's a good thing. Okay. Now, this is going to go in the refrigerator, and let it sit while the fat renders off in the oven. After 1 hour, I've removed this from the oven. I've lowered the oven temperature down to 150 Celsius. I'm going to drain the fat off of this. The pieces of fat that are in here really don't have any application immediately, so those are going to end up being pulled out and just tossed. As you can see, I got a lot of lamb fat out of that. This is more than we need, but it's nice and clear. So I got a pan that's heating up here. I'll put about 2 tablespoons of that lamb fat in. And begin browning off the pieces, including, of including the bone. This needs to be brown too, and the middle of the pan is the hottest, so that bone can take the heat. That's where the bone's going to go, right in the middle. And you're also going to need 4 heads of garlic. And the preparation for this is very simple. You just cut the top off like that, exposing the cloves. This goes in the waste. This is what's going to be used. And after about 10 minutes, you've got some nice color on this lamb, and it's ready for the next step. I have the same braising dish that I used to render the fat. I'm putting this bone in, and then I'm going to arrange pieces of lamb around it. Like this. And a couple of other little extra tidbits of lamb that came off, so I'm just going to stick those down in there. Now, we have the garlic cloves. They're going to go rest on top of this. Don't worry about the paper. We'll peel this off later. It's going to come off when it's cooking, but it's not going to be difficult to get rid of. So, in like this. And the last touch is I've got half a star anise. I just broke it into little pieces, and I'm just going to toss this down the sides here, anywhere. Now this gets covered up and goes into the oven for the braise. Now, turning our attention back to this pan that the lamb was just browned in, we need a vegetable stock for making this. There's a lot of flavor in here. Yeah, I know it's not vegetable flavor, but that's going to be fine. Yeah, this is vegetable stock is one of the rare instances where I suggest you actually buy either a canned product, or if you're in a restaurant, and there's this stuff by Knorr called Delicat that is powdered mix of dried vegetables, probably some other stuff too that is less than ideal, but this is going to taste great. And in a restaurant, that's your first priority, is you want it to taste great. So we're going to mix this together. Get half a liter of water, scrape the bottom of this pan, bring it up to a simmer. This mix is already cooked, and then we're just going to set this off to the side. Pour it in a bowl or something, set it off to the side. We're going to use it later. We just want to make this reconstitute the vegetables in there. If you're using a canned vegetable stock, then you just want to bring up the fond from the bottom of the pan and incorporate it into the mixture. Okay, once it's been simmered for a few minutes, you transfer it to a cup here, and I'm going to put the saffron in it. Needs a good healthy pinch of saffron, about 1 standard packet, whatever that is. And just let this infuse. And this will be the stock that we use for this. I just cover this up with some cling film and let it stand until we're ready for it. Now, it's been about 3 to 3.5 hours since I put this in, and you want to check it. You know, take a knife and feel the lamb. If it's not tender, if the knife doesn't easily penetrate it, it's not done. I don't care how long it's been in, put it back. It's not done. This is okay. There's a little bit of resistance, because that's okay. You want a little bit of resistance. You don't want it to be falling apart, otherwise it'll just turn into goo on the plate. A little bit of resistance is fine. So this is done. Now I have to carefully remove this off to a plate so I don't break up the lamb or the garlic cloves. So here's the large pieces of lamb. The garlic has been roasted until it's really just squishy soft. Here we have the lamb jus that was in the pan. Now there's a little bit of fat in here, but remember we cut most of the fat off of the lamb. So we're not going to worry about that fat that's in there. We're going to use this jus exactly the way it is in just a moment here. As in Uzbekistan, they have a kind of rice called laser rice. I don't think it exists anywhere else. Carnaroli is very similar, works well. In a pinch, you can use arborio. Not really a great choice. What I've got here is the carnaroli rice that I ran in a sieve. I ran it under cold water for several minutes, and now I'm adding the juices came off the lamb. Make sure you pass this through a sieve because you've got star anise and some other solids in there you don't want. Also, barberries. You can use raisins if you can't get barberries. These are these beautiful organic Russian barberries. Very nice. And I'm using about 20 grams. Adding nigella, an important ingredient to make this authentic. Hard to find outside of, hard to find in the West, but very worthwhile ingredient. Also the thyme, dried thyme. And I'm just going to give this a stir. Let the barberries reconstitute a little bit. Everything just sit here and soak while we begin cooking the onion and the carrot and the other spices. Make sure you've got your mise en place for the next stage. I've got onions that I cut thin, breaking up into rings here. 70 grams of carrot that's been shredded on the coarse side of a grater. The remaining seasoning we reserved. This was the same seasoning that was used to coat the lamb before it was browned and then braised. And the lamb fat, which is now solidified because it's been quite a while. So now we're ready to heat the pan. Now, if you watch my videos, you know I almost never say use maximum heat. It never comes out of my mouth. This is one of those rare exceptions. Maximum heat. As hot as you can make the stove go, that's what you want. One of the problems with people trying to cook this at home is they can't get the stove hot enough. This is cooked over a raging fire originally, and you cannot overheat this. Yes, it will smoke. That's part of the recipe. So we've got a big dollop of this lamb fat going in, and it's going to spit. We're going to cook these onions in that fat at the super high temperature. The hottest you can possibly make the stove go, that's what you want. Also add just a little bit of salt to this, just a little bit. We're looking for some serious hurt on these onions. And of course, it's also creating this fond on the bottom of the pan. That's okay, that'll get picked up later. Don't use a Teflon pan for this, by the way. Use a metal pan. It's smoking. Okay, when you've got a lot of browning here and it's slowing down, the heat, by the way, the whole time is still on absolute maximum. Now I'm going to add another tablespoon or so of that lamb fat. It's not done yet. It's got to really, really brown. Okay, when it gets to a stage like this is still on maximum heat, by the way, the whole time. Now I'm going to add the carrots in. This will slow it down a little bit for a minute, but we'll also want to get these carrots really well cooked too. And the moisture from the carrots is going to help deglaze the pan just a little bit. Still, maximum heat, maximum heat. Now, when you start to smell like it's going to start burning next, that's when we're going to add this spice. But you want to take it right to that edge. You want to get it right to the edge as much as you can. Don't let it actually turn to charcoal, but those first few wisps that you smell of burnt, okay, it's ready now. Now, here's the rice, the barberries, and all that. This has to go in, get cooked. Now I can actually turn the heat down. I'm going to go down to about 7 out of 1 to 10. Finally the heat goes down a little bit. And we're going to cook this, stirring it until we try to get the rice to absorb all of the liquid that was in there. That's the first step. Use the moisture from this to deglaze the bottom of the pan. Scrape it as much as you can. You probably won't get all of the fond on the bottom off because it was with that super high heat, it's pretty intense. But you try to get a lot of it off. Scrape the bottom of the pan. Now this rice is starting to get dried out. Most of the liquid has been absorbed. So I'm going to call this done at this point for this stage. So now what? Now we've got the vegetable stock that I combined with the fond that was at the bottom of the pan when I browned the lamb. I can remember that. Now this is very liquidy now, of course. I'm going to use the rest of the liquid to try to scrape up whatever I can off the bottom here. Again, you want as much of that fond as you can into the dish. If you can't get it all, okay, but try. Now we put the chickpeas. These are 120 grams of chickpeas that were canned that I've rinsed and drained. Now, simple. We put a lid on it and let it begin simmering. I've turned the heat way down to 4 now. Okay, after this comes up to a boil, like so, we're going to turn the heat way down to about 1.5. We're going to keep this on a very slow simmer. We're not going to stir it anymore. We're just going to let it simmer very, very slowly until this thickens up and absorbs all the moisture. Now it has been about 22 minutes, and you can see that the surface of this is now dry. It's still got plenty of moisture bubbling away in there, but the surface is dry. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the lamb in here, lid back on, and let this continue cooking. Okay, after 10 more minutes, I'm turning the heat off completely. It was on the lowest setting, 1 out of 10. Now I'm going to turn it off completely, let it sit for 5 more minutes, still covered. And then at the final stage, just before plating, this garlic gets stuck in under the salamander or broiler and finished up. You have to be very careful not to burn this. You want to rewarm it. You want to caramelize it a little bit on top. Do not burn it. Be careful. If you like my videos, look for my cookbook, now available through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other internet bookseller sites. Also look for my cocktail book, Cocktails of the South Pacific and Beyond, Advanced Mixology, available through Amazon online.